Right. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to mute everyone except for Jeannie.
Mm.
Actually, Jeannie, you can unmute yourself. There we go. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special evening. It's been years in the making. I was lucky enough to hear a fabulous presentation from Jeannie Milgram, the author of My 15 Grandmothers, and since has authored another book, which Jeannie will tell you about. And as I was saying earlier, my soul is still being nourished from the beautiful presentation filled with such joy and soul and gratitude. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Jeannie, and who's going to take us on a fabulous, fabulous journey. Thank you so much, Jeannie, for giving of your time and joining with us tonight. And we are so looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hani, and thank you to everyone for being here tonight. I will tell you my personal story, but and I always give this caveat when I start. I give you my story from my heart and my soul, and I give it everything I have. Therefore, it's a very long and difficult journey, and I still get choked up. It happened 30 years ago, and it's still very hard for me, because if I were to just tell you, then I think it would really not be meaningful. So as I give it over to you, I live it, and I see some faces of B'nai Anusim here, and so I want you to know that I understand the difficulty associated with returning, and I understand and will always be there for anyone that is in that position. And that is pretty much what is my goal at this juncture of my life. So I was born in Cuba, and my family was Roman Catholic. My grandparents were Spanish. So it's not like it was a long-standing Cuban family. They had only been in Cuba for one generation. When Castro took over, we moved to Miami. They were a very Roman Catholic family, and we moved to Coral Gables here in Florida. And I was immediately put in a Catholic school. I was put in St. Teresa. And it's, there's enough jokes about Catholic schools in the 60s that you understand that it's tough. It was just a very tough environment. A lot of, dogma just pounding in your head. And I was a very young, 6, 7 years old, when it just didn't make sense to me. There was something inside me that at that age, just like something's wrong. I felt like I didn't belong to the family I had been born in. And it's a very uncomfortable feeling for a child. And yet I knew that it wasn't something I could really talk about. So I tried talking in school to the priests and the nuns, and I just didn't fit in. And I was questioning. Besides questioning, I almost was feeling I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I didn't know about Judaism. I was a little kid in Catholic school, and it was just I had trouble buying all of the dogma, everything from the virgin birth to, just the whole thing. I couldn't. So, but time continues, and every time I would mention I had trouble, I would be punished in a way, because I couldn't go to recess. I had to learn Latin, or I had to go talk to the priest, or I had to go talk to the nun. So it was a very difficult, but I've always been very spiritual, and I did enjoy the times where I would pray, because I've always been that kind of person from a child. I went on to a Catholic high school. In the beginning, it was an all-girls school. It's Immaculata La Salle. And you probably, if you know Miami, have seen it. It's right by Mercy Hospital. Also very intense. There, I became a spiritual leader. And it was still, there was a lot of turmoil, but I just, went with it. At some point, you just have to go with things, and that happens to all of us. And then I went to Berry College, and an all-women's Catholic university. So it just kind of continued where it was just, however, I was very young. And when I got there, I was 15 years old. And even though I was in a medical school and a kind of in the chemical field, I took a comparative religions class, and the nun that taught me saw that something was really going on. She was the dean, and she taught me. And of course, it was a year class. And oh my gosh, when she got to Judaism, I was like, this is it. This is what has been missing. And we learned everything from Shinto to, I mean, you name it, it was there. But Judaism is just what grasped my soul and wouldn't let go. And this nun said to me, when I left Barry, she said, you have to follow your heart. You're different. Understand that you're different. You have to follow what you feel inside. And I didn't quite understand, but later I learned that it was this nun and a couple of the other nuns at Barry that had gone and single-handedly collected funds on Miami Beach for the Holocaust Memorial. She became very famous with that whole Elian Gonzalez Cuban crisis that happened here with that little boy from Cuba. And she was just a powerhouse. I believe that she died a couple of years ago. But life takes over. Like I said, I got married very, very young at 17. And I had Cuban Catholic. Life takes over. And after a few years, I had a boy, and then I had a girl. And at the age of 28, I just couldn't do this anymore. There was just no way. I really couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't, fake to be someone I wasn't feeling it. It just wasn't. And it cost me my marriage, which wasn't a great thing because you're Cuban, you're Catholic. That's not what girls did back then. And then I was a single mom. And then I was left to my own devices, and I started really reading about Judaism. I started while I was married, and I was hiding the books under my bed. And I was, sneaking off to synagogue Friday nights, pretending I was going to ceramic classes. And the only problem with that, besides the fact that I was not being honest, is that I had to come up with ceramic pieces that I had made in ceramic class. So then I would buy them from the other ladies already made in different levels of being made. So it was very difficult. I can make a joke of it, but you understand that I was struggling, and I wasn't struggling physically. I was struggling spiritually. So I started going to a Reconstructionist synagogue, and then I went to a Reformed synagogue for about a year. And it wasn't doing it for me personally because my family stopped talking to me, and all my friends stopped talking to me. And every time, like I started at the Reconstructionist and I was having a great time, but it wasn't, it wasn't for me because it wasn't what I had been reading about. It wasn't what I had been, cherishing. So at the Reformed synagogue, it just was a little bit better. At the conservative synagogue, I didn't stay there long. And then I found a little shtibel here where I live down in Kendall, and the rabbi came running out with a black hat, and the tzitzis swinging, and I thought to myself, I've come home. And also by the fact that I had lost everyone. And from the Jewish side, every time I would move to a different level, and I found this very weird, but when I went from the Reconstructionist to the Reform, the Reconstructionists wouldn't talk to me anymore. And then when I went from Reform to Conservative, the Reform friends wouldn't talk to me anymore. And then when I left Conservative, now I was at an Orthodox synagogue and no one was talking to me. I was alone with my kids. And that was the end of that. It was a very difficult time. And I did not convert my children. So during this process, the rabbis did not understand how I did not want to convert my children for many, many reasons. I did not convert them. And also I wasn't allowed to in my papers. So I couldn't, and the rabbis of the Beit Din in Miami didn't understand how I could have a religious home as a single mom with 2 kids that weren't converted. So that process took 5.5 years. A very long 5.5 years to be a young woman who wants to remake her life with 2 children and no one talking to you, the family barely talking to you. I always worked with my dad. So my dad in the office, we were talking, but my mom wasn't. I mean, nobody was talking. So it was a very difficult, very long. I lost all my friends from high school. I lost my college friends, and no one from the Jewish world was reaching out a hand and saying, hey, come to us for Rosh Hashanah. It wasn't happening. So this is why I say to anyone that's here, and if you ever, I am that hand. I will always be that hand because it was just never there for me. And I think part of the problem is, not understanding or not having the education of what a person's going through in such a situation. So after 5.5 years, I converted, and I converted Orthodox, and I joined the community here, very active, president of the sisterhood, treasurer of the shul, very active. A couple of years later, I met my husband, who was in the same industry, pharmaceutical, and he was from Antwerp. He moved to Miami, born from religious, from a Hasidic family. And you can read more about this in my book, My 15 Grandmothers. I go more into detail about everything that I'm telling you here. And so we started our lives together. And I didn't think I was anything but a convert. And I'm not saying that minimally. I'm just saying, for all intents and purposes, I was a convert. And on a Friday, and I'm always been Shabbat observant. I am religious. So on a Friday morning, my maternal grandmother died, and I go to the house, and my mom says to me, we have to bury her immediately. I'm like, what? You're Cuban, you're Catholic, bury her Monday, because I cannot come on Shabbat, Mom. I'm not going to talk to you again. Well, you're already not talking to me much. So as painful as this is, I cannot get in a car and go to a funeral. And I spoke at length to my rabbi, and he said, there was 100 ways of solving this, and all of them included my husband and I sleeping at the funeral home. And I just couldn't. It was in great distress that I did not go to my grandmother's funeral, because my grandmother, all through her life, my maternal grandmother, had been teaching me things which I only much later realized were Jewish customs. So I didn't go to the funeral. My friends came to me Shabbat at home from shul, and I was sitting there, and my mom comes up the drive, and she hands me some Star of David earrings, and she hands me a Hamsa pendant. And she said, your grandmother wanted you to have this on the day of her death. And she turned on her heel and she left. And as I'm sitting there holding this, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my grandmother and grandfather were first cousins, born in Spain. I'd been trying to do my genealogy since I was 16 years old, and nobody would listen to me. And all of a sudden, and it's all flooding back to me. And as much as I had learned, 5.5 years of learning everything, I had a PhD in Judaism. And as much as I had learned, I never realized that they could have come from the Jews of Spain. It just didn't click. A lot of people say, how can it not? It didn't. It did not click because there had been so much animosity on all parts of the family that it just didn't click. My grandmother died very close to the time I married my husband. She was at the chuppah, so she knew, and all she could tell me the whole time that I was converting and I was dating, and she was saying, this is so dangerous what you're doing. And in my head, I thought she meant it was dangerous for my soul. I never for a minute thought that she meant it was dangerous to be a Jew. But then later on, I understood that this was the message she was trying to say. What I found, what I also didn't find odd, was that when my sister and I were little, they would drop us off at church on Sundays and pick us up an hour later. And every Sunday, every year, all through grade school, from K through 8th grade, I was dropped off and picked up. So I would look around and everyone had their families, you know, Spanish families, America, everybody goes to church with their kids, but my sister and I went alone. So it also didn't click. So you must wonder, why didn't it click? But I believe that God opens doors for us in our brain and teaches us things on I'm convinced it's on a need to know basis. So while it should have clicked, it was not time for me to know that. So there I am after my grandmother's death, and I asked my mom for papers. Of course, she was very reticent. She said she had nothing, but she gave me a family tree that my grandfather had done going back to 17 something, 90, something like that. And I decided that, you know what? These feelings were too strong, too deep, for too long for me not to have come from the Jews of Spain. And I took the tree and I went to a genealogist in Spain and I said, I'm looking for a lineage. I only want my maternal lineage. And he's questioning me, what are you looking for? And I knew he was an ex-priest. And I did that on purpose because I didn't want something I could pay for. I really wanted to know the truth. And I'm sure there's a lot of things out there that you can pay for. And that's not my objective. I wanted to know if I came from the Jews of Spain. So he started going back and back and back and got me there was no one that had done this ever. And I was liking to prove that I had been born Jewish because I still wanted that my children should experience the my biggest joy in life, my biggest pride is to be a Jew. And I wanted my children to have that. And so I went ahead and continued looking. Meanwhile, I became very active on social media. And after a while, as the genealogist kept sending me papers, and again, no one had ever done it. And I didn't know, I knew I had to take it to a Beit Din, a religious court in Israel. But since no one had ever done it, I'd had so much experience with the Beit Din here in Miami that I knew this thing needed to be watertight. So I got every birth certificate or baptism certificate, every marriage certificate, and every death certificate going back to 1545. And there was like something that alluded to the last grandmother having been the aunt or the mother or the sister, something of the Inquisition of Spain, but I didn't find a full Inquisition document. I did find a lot of circumstantial evidence. I found evidence of marriage pacts that were not like when we signed to Naim for certain reasons that you don't get married until later. I found certain things like that. I found a lot of babies that had not been baptized because they were too sick. And at the end of the day, they didn't die. So when I got to my 15th grandmother, I packed it all up and I went off to Israel. And there had been a rabbi that had made a decree for the island of Majorca that if you were from that island, my family was not. They were from near Portugal. But this was a very famous rabbi, and he had made a decree that if you were from that island, you didn't need a conversion, you were automatically Jewish. So I felt he probably has a lot of knowledge about this. And I took all my papers to him. He didn't speak English. My husband was translating in Yiddish. The Hasidim were standing out the door. And he didn't understand me because he kept saying to my husband, by halacha, by Jewish law, she's a Jew. What more does she want? I can't make salt go away. So I was really discouraged. But then I went to knock on the door of the Beit Din Gadol, the big Jewish court in Israel. The rabbi was super nice. He sat with me, looked at all my genealogy, went through everything. And he said, oh, this is wonderful. This is magnificent. This is fantastic. But I need two things. I need you to prove that that village where your ancestors lived for 500 years, there's nothing written about it historically. I need you to prove to me that there were Jews there. And I need you to find a man or a woman directly on your maternal lineage that was judged as a Jew in the Inquisition. Mind you, that trip to Israel and that had already taken between 8 and 10 years. It took me that long to find all of that documentation because, again, I was the first one that did it. I was pioneering. And by now, my kids were older. My kids had left the house. They couldn't care less. However, I became on social media. People were writing me and cheering me on. Come on, you got to do it. You got to do it. And then I realized that my mission, let's say, was bigger than my kids, my family, this and that. And I continued. I got back to Miami and I was so devastated because I was so certain that all of this circumstantial evidence, all of this documentation going back to 1545 was going to be enough. And to be told, go back to the drawing board and find, I'm like, oh my gosh, because I knew the genealogist had already been in these dusty archives in Madrid, which are behind me. And those dusty archives had yielded zero as far as that one woman that maybe was an aunt or something. So I was devastated. I was crushed. And my husband said, you do know we're going to have to go to that village, right? And I'm like, honestly, of course I knew, of course I understood, but I was scared to death. Because what if I was wrong? What if all of this had been going on all of these years? And what if it was wishful thinking? We all know what that's like. We really want something really bad. We really feel that a relationship is there for us, or you have a best friend and it's not real. So I had wondered about my own sanity with this because too long had gone on. I was afraid to go to the village and my husband was kind of dragging me, let's go, let's go. So we get to Spain and Madrid and we start driving west because we had to drive all the way to almost Portugal. It was right on the tip of Portugal. And we get there and in my brain, I realized that the Spanish Jews had fled to Portugal. And I immediately opened up my computer. And since I had all the genealogy with me, within minutes, I found 45 people on my tree directly judged in the Portuguese Inquisition. So that was like, oh my gosh, I'm halfway there. And it was even before I set foot in the village. So I said, okay, now my job is to prove that this village had a Jewish presence, which I thought that was a little over the top as a request. But the rabbi said to me, and he was very gentle, but anyway, he said, look, you cannot claim a Jewish phenomenon going on in a place where there's an inquisition going, and you're telling me that your family's hiding, and I'm telling you that there had to be other Jews, that your family wasn't alone. But when I got, and I saw the geography of where it was, and I saw that my grandfather used to tell me that all he had to do was, cross the river and he could throw a ball across the river to the Portuguese kids. And when I got there, it wasn't a river, it was an ocean. And I was starting to doubt it again. I mean, this is very tearing. And it seems that somewhere in the 50s after my grandfather, they made a dam. So it went from a rivulet to this massive ocean. So that explained it. And historically, they did tell me that it was like a tiny creek at one point. So I start walking in the village with my family tree in hand, 8,750 people on it. And I'm holding it and it's folded and it's folded. And I'm walking in this tiny village with maybe 300 people. Looks exactly the same. You'll see pictures when I'm finished. Exactly the same as it did when my grandparents lived there. Look exactly the same when my Jewish relatives lived there. And I'm asking, does anybody know about the Jews of the village? Oh, there were never any Jews here. And that's like, I was taking a deep breath every time I was walking. Like, what do you mean there were no Jews? I mean, I wanted to every person. No, there was Visigoths and there was Muslims and Moors and the Celts were here. No Jews. But the lady at the door of the church might know. She takes care of the church. So I get to the door of the church and the lady had the same last name as my grandfather, Ramus. And it's a compound, unusual last name for her to have it too. So she's asking me the name of my family, and I'm reading off every name. I'm going back. Every Spanish name you can think of. Menendez, Gutierrez, Alvarez, anything you can dream of, Garcia as a name, a Spanish name, was on my tree. We're talking already 16 generations and nothing. And she's saying no. And she kept insisting, give me the name of the family. And I remember that my grandfather had written in tiny writing on the top of that little family tree I told you about. He wrote, they used to call us Boyico. Boyico, I learned later in Ladino, means little bread, like a bun. And I said, when she kept insisting, what's the family name? I blurted out, Boyico. It came to me. And she said, oh my God, you're a descendant of the Boyicos? And I'm like, I guess so. She said, let me show you the synagogue tomorrow. Really, I wanted to take this family tree and hit this woman over the head with it. It's about this big, because she kept me standing there for 2 hours like, there's no Jews, there were never any Jews. And the minute I said Boyico, the sky opened up. She took me to a building. And in the building, the lady said, I've lived here for 50 years, but this is the original, the oral tradition tells us that this is the original arch of the synagogue before 1492. And I said, well, can I see inside? She had redone everything. She took me and they knew, she said, on the 3rd floor, the rabbi lived. The synagogue was on the 1st floor. The family lived in the middle floor. And this was the synagogue, but there was like no clue, no evidence. And I was getting, to say the least, a little hysterical because I had nowhere to turn. I had already been to the Beit Din. I knew that I had to find this. I had come so far. By the time I got there, I had those 45 relatives, and all these people are following me on social media, and I'm like, oy. So there was nothing, zero. She put wallpaper on top of everything, and whatever she didn't put wallpaper on, she had painted. And as I'm getting ready to leave, I see a little door to the side, and I said, what's in there? And she said, oh, I've never done that. And I've never redone that. And I said, oh, please, please, let me go in there. And I'm actually opening the door. This poor woman is elderly, and I'm being that ugly American that nobody wants to be, but I couldn't walk out of there because it was like my whole being depended on this. And when she opens it up, there's like a hole in the ground. Really, nothing had been redone. And there's like a baby gate around a hole in the ground. And I said, I need to go down there. And she said, really? No, it's dangerous. That's where I keep my ham. I said, you know what? I removed the baby gate, and I'm still feeling guilty about this so many years later because I was so rude, but that was it. That was like my last straw. So when I started going down these 7 steps, I'm in a rectangular room. There's a water spout in it. The hams are hanging all over the place. And I realized that I'm in the mikvah of the synagogue. And the water spout, I went to touch it, and it looked like granite, because this town is built on a wall of granite. It's a mountain of granite. And this spout of water that was going in there was smooth as butter. And oh my gosh, but I knew it wasn't enough. So I found another girl who was a guide in a park. They'd never heard of Jews or anything like that. And she said, give me some pictures, give me some symbols. So I went on my phone and I'm like, this is a menorah, look for this. I showed her the Hebrew alphabet, something that looks like this. And I Star of David, something that looks like this. And I just kept, coming up with like even, I looked up medieval Jewish symbology, and I was showing this girl. We were running all over this town, my husband and I was taking pictures right and left, things that were like on the walls that you couldn't really see properly. And I was just taking pictures and pictures. I came back to Miami with about 500 pictures, and I tweeted it out, and I sent them around the world. I sent them to Biblical Archaeology, to Bar Ilan, to Oxford, to Notre Dame, anyone that had any kind of interest in the Inquisition. And nobody answered me except one man from the north of the Galilee who was a tour guide and an archaeologist. And he said to me, You need to go back there and take these pictures at the sun of 2 o'clock. These messages were hidden in the walls when you can only are visible with the sun of 2 o'clock. Now, I had promised my husband that we would never go back. So, but I had come too far. I mean, I had come too far. So we went back, took a few months. This time, I picked up 2 historians, medieval historians in Madrid. I picked up cameramen. I said, because if I'm going to make this discovery, someone's going to be behind me taking video. And we go back to Fermosella is the village. I'll show you later where it is. And when we get there, I see an elderly man. The whole population's very elderly. And he was like, you know, on a walker. And he says, can I help you? And I said, well, he said, I was the mayor 50 years ago. And I said, well, I was looking for the synagogue. And he said, what's your last name? And hey, I was ready. Boyico. He said, let me show you the synagogue. I said, oh, thank you, but I've seen it. He said, oh, no, you haven't. You have not seen this. He walked another 5 steps. He knocks on a door and he says, open the synagogue. There's a descendant of Uncle Boyico here. And from inside the house, I could hear like, what? And so all of a sudden they open this door. It looks like a dollhouse. And you can see a house split in 2. And underneath there were stairs going down. I'm walking down there with my entourage, everybody behind me. And I'm now in a cellar where I could see there was something carved out. It was like an Aron Kodesh. You could see a side entrance. There was like these benches on the side carved out of rock. And immediately you realize the synagogue I had seen on top was before 1492, and that one was 1492. And as I was standing there, they were taking pictures. There was pictures right and pictures left. And the cockroaches were all over my feet. And all I could do was cry. All I could do was cry because I realized that my family had been subjected to that hole in the ground. And the feelings that they had brought to me, and I don't know what the scientific term is. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, it's in the brain, it's in the soul. I don't even go there because it's above my ability to conceive this. All I knew is that my grandmothers had brought me to that point. So I packed up everything, we took pictures. I also knew at that moment that I would need to go around the world telling this story, because that's the story of the Jew lost to Jewish history. That's the story of the Jew lost to history. And I was witnessing it. So if I was witnessing, I don't care if I'm talking to a group of 1,200 like I did 2 nights ago, or I'm talking to a group of 1. But this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell this story, as painful as it is, because it just schlepped the whole time. But I was going to do it. So I go outside and we're at the sun of 2 o'clock and we're taking pictures. And sure enough, and I'll show you in a few minutes, how something that could not be seen before turned into something incredible, with the name of God, even with a name in Hebrew, Yud Hey Vav Hey. I'll show you in a minute. So there was all of this. I pack everything up. I go back to Israel. I think that rabbi thought he'd see the end of me, right? No way. So I pack everything up. I go back to Israel, and I'm with all my proof and all my pictures and everything. And he's like in amazement that I had found all this Jewish history. And not only that, 45 people on the Inquisition, and most of my relatives were burned to death. So I have since then read all of their Inquisition documents, how they were tortured, what they said, what they were burned for. And I have read them night after night, because if I was meant to know this history and talk about this history, then I was meant to absolutely take this history in. So the Beit Din in Israel translated all of this into Hebrew. And a couple of years later, I received a letter from the chief rabbi of the Beit Din saying that God had brought me to this place in a very unusual way. He had made me go round and round and round and round but that from that moment on, no one should question ever that I was born Jewish, and that all my descendants and all my ascendants would be Jewish. So it was just an unbelievable day, and gave me the strength to be able to help other people, because it can be done. Nowadays, I've learned enough that I know it's not going to be that difficult, but it can definitely be done. So from that day, life continued. I became very active. I wrote my book, My 15 Grandmothers. I receive 400 to 600 emails a month still. Nowadays, with the Zoom business and all these thousands of people, I'm getting even more. And then I wrote the book, How I Found My 15 Grandmothers. All of my books are in English and Spanish because I speak in both languages. Then I wrote the book, Pyre to Fire, which is a historical fiction. 85% of it is the voyage of my family as crypto Jews, where they went, what they did, what they wore, because all of that was in the documentation. So, and after that, I'll tell you about the last book after I tell you about my mom. So the whole time I was in search of all this, my mom told me that she had nothing in the house. By then, of course, we had made a very civil relationship, and, you know, she came over and it was civil. And at one moment, back in 2013, she tells me she wants to visit my rabbi. And I'm like, really, Mom? I'm not taking. So my husband, who's so sweet and really just took my mom to see the rabbi, and she said to the rabbi that she didn't want to die Catholic. She wanted to take back her Jewish roots. So the rabbi said, by the terms of this letter that we received in Israel, you have to take it on. You cannot just, say you're Jewish, you're Jewish by ancestry, obviously, but you have to take it on. So light candles. So my mom lit candles. I went with her. I was feeling I was in a Twilight Zone sort of moment as I was lighting candles with Mom, because come on, after all of this time. So I lit candles with Mom and I left. It was almost Shabbos. I came home, and a couple of days later, Mom went into a deep Alzheimer. She's 92. She's still alive. I was never able to question this. It was the last thing she did. That was a conscious act. And, the grief, I'm very happy that she did this, obviously, because she took back what she knew was true all along. But my grief at not being able to discuss this, like this last minute act, I visit her now with this COVID, they keep me away from her, but normally 3-4 days a week. And I'm always like, I never want to bring it up. I mean, we're talking 2014 and, it's 2020. So this was quite a few years ago, but I know I just hold her hands and I stare at her and I'm like, oh my gosh. So once I took her out of the house, I started looking in the places that she never let me look, the papers, the drawers, all of this kind of stuff. And as I'm looking at all this stuff, I find hundreds of recipes written in tiny little thing, repeated from one grandmother to another grandmother and another grandmother. And then I find a box full of the originals of those documents that I paid a fortune, that took me 8-10 years to locate. The birth certificate, the marriage certificates, the death certificates of all of these grandmothers. And they're all there in original. And Mom's already in a memory care place. And I'm sitting there on the kitchen floor and I'm like, is this for real? One thing that struck me as I took back my Jewish religion and the religion of my ancestors was always to judge favorably. That has always been a biggie with me, because we're so quick to judge. And it's just, that really stuck with me. So at that moment, instead of going berserk of how could you do this to me and getting into that pity party, I said, you know what? I was meant to find it at this time. My mom and my grandmothers schlepped it when they went from Spain to Portugal, to the Canary Islands. They went to Cartagena, Colombia. They went to San Jose, Costa Rica, then they came to Cuba, and somehow these grandmothers took these prized possessions of all of this. So I had to thank my mom for keeping it, because really at the end of the day, she kept every scrap of paper. And then I wrote my last book, which was published in Israel, called The Recipes of My 15 Grandmothers. And to my amazement, that book became it was published in September. That book became a bestseller in, I don't know, 3 weeks. I was shocked. Of course, my friends told me, the other one's your journey. It's very serious. This is about Jews and it's about food. So of course it's going to do well. So now what I dedicate myself to is I've been trying to get the Inquisition records digitized around the world. I made a deal with MyHeritage, the DNA company, and he agreed to fund it if I would get the contract to get the records digitized. So since 2015, I have been battling at all of these, the archives of Spain, Portugal, Cartagena, Colombia, the Inquisition records of Mexico, Lima, Peru, and I have visited again and again and again all those archives, and I have been really battling the Catholic Church all this time. However, this week we received the contract from Portugal. It's going back and forth between the lawyers, so it's something that should be breaking. It's a big deal that this will be digitized for the first time. So this is what I'm doing. I'm on Facebook. I'm lecturing. I'm telling my story. I'm telling people how to find their roots. I'm writing more and more just to record history. And that's it. So, honey.
Wow. And it's not the first time I've heard this story. It's so touching, and we're so grateful that I remember you telling us how much energy telling your story takes.
It does take a lot, but let me show the slides. If you'll show them, and then I will talk about them.
Okay. All right. So we're going to share.
And I always show it at the end because I like people to listen to me and not be looking at a slide.
Okay.
Okay.
Good?
We're good. So if you can go to the slide, next slide. Okay, no, back one. You skip one. Okay. It's that yellow one we're looking for. Okay, so if you take a look at this, you will see that the area that's shaded in gray, I'm going to ask people not to chat while I'm doing this because it covers, on the screen, it covers my slide, so I have a hard time seeing it. Here on the red dot in the middle, you can see Fermoselle, that's the village of my ancestors. It's in the Zamora region of Spain. And if you know Spain, we are talking about the total northwest corridor of Spain. It's about 4 hours by car west, and you can see you jump off and you have a river, natural. So my family went as hidden Jews, as crypto Jews, they went from Spain to Portugal to Spain to Portugal. Next. This is the Hamsa that my grandmother gave me, and while many people have told me, yes, it's also an Arab trinket or Moorish, it was enough of an important thing for my grandmother that it was given to me on the day, super antique, on the day that she died, along with the next slide. Okay, this is a Star of David earrings. So inside a shell, and if you've ever seen Jewish architecture in Spain or in Toledo, for example, all of the columns are shaped as shells. It was a huge Jewish symbol to have things inside shells. So many people have asked me if I've had these valued, and the answer is no. If my grandmother thought that they were important enough to give to me, not while she lived, but while she died, I don't care if they're 200, 300 years old or 700 years old. It was just what was important to her, and I value and treasure it. Next. So this is an aerial view of the village today. You can see it's kind of built up like a medieval village. It starts at the very tip and goes all the way out. It's a lot wider, and hence this dizzying streets have never been changed from the time that my grandfather was born there and the time that my relatives were there in the 1500s. Next. This is the kind of records that I had to look at to find my lineage. So even as a genealogist, it's been a challenge. I had to learn how to read medieval Spanish, and I had to learn how to read medieval Portuguese when they crossed the river in 1510. And so, by the way, at this juncture, I have gone back to 1405, pre-Inquisition Portugal. So I went, and 22 grandmothers maternal with no breakage in a row. Next. This is the entrance to the village, and because I was able to find so much of the Jewish symbology, I found that this is not the entrance to the Jewish quarter. A lot of people thought it was, but I was able to map out the addresses of my grandmothers from the 1600s, and then I was able to map out where I found, because by the way, I also found a mikvah outside, not at the synagogue, and I'll show you that in a minute. Next. Okay, so some of the homes still look like this, right? So it's like from a troglodyte period. People still live in these homes, and you can see the doors. It's just amazing. And I wanted to show you this because I want to show you how, let's use the word easy, after you know what you're looking for, it was, because nothing has changed. Next. This is one of the streets, and this particular is a street leading up. I had a couple of my relatives live on this street. So I gave some lectures in Spain last year with an architect who had done his thesis and dissertation on these benches that you see on the right-hand side. So in the Jewish quarter of any village in Spain and Portugal, when you have these little benches, that's where the Jews lived, because they would live in their homes and they would sell, like my family. They were shoemakers, and they were artisans, all in the guild, shoemakers and furriers, and they sold leather. So they would put their goods right outside, and they would sit on one of the benches. So he was able to prove that if a village had no Jews, there were no benches, and if it had the benches, there were Jews. So it was just an interesting, and this house to the right is one where my family lived in the 1600s. Next. So you'll see a better picture of this, but when I stepped down into that hole under the synagogue, everything was made of granite, everything was super old, and I found, just like you see it there, I found this granite, but as rough as it looks, it was soft as butter with a water coming out. That means that water came out for a very long time. Next slide. This is a better view. So I followed the water outside, and it was a kosher mikvah. I followed the water line outside. This woman who already thought I was rude and crazy, but this was on the outside. I saw the holding tank, and we had built a synagogue. In my synagogue here, we had built a mikvah, so I learned a little bit of knowledge to know that it was a kosher mikvah as I saw the holding tanks outside. Next. So this is the stairs leading underground, and if you look on top, there's like a trap door, and the Aron Kodesh was right to the left. It was like a place, like a shelf, and this was the stairs. This is the one I told you that had all the cockroaches that the second mayor had brought me to. Next. This is the entrance to the mikvah that's outside. So I went down the steps. It has 7 steps leading down to crystalline clear water. And I don't know if you can make it out, but on the left-hand side of this mikvah, there was like a carving of an angel. And if you look closely, it might look like a butterfly wing, right? So it might look like a butterfly wing, but basically it really is like not an angel, but like a cherub. So that was there on the left-hand side. Next. So I'm standing on the top step. And as you go down, you can go straight down. The water looks dirty. It's not. The rocks are hundreds of years old. The water is crystal clear. And when you go down, it is a rectangular, full mikvah being fed by springs. Next. So at the same time, there was a woman in Salamanca, about 200 miles south of this town, who had been doing a lot of research on what she called converso crosses. So on the side of the church, this was interpreted by this professor of Salamanca, who, by the way, was kicked out of the university for even daring to intimate that this is not a Catholic cross, that this is actually a Jewish cross. So the Jews could not put up mezuzahs. They could not do anything. So what did they do? I've since researched villages up and down the river, and it's always the same. This is like the steps of Zion, and they would put the cross there, but this is actually known as a crypto-Jewish cross. Next. This one was very intense. It kind of gave me the creeps, because to the left, you can see the logo of the Inquisition, and right at the door of one of the churches, you can see they actually made the logo there. The Inquisition was there. So there was just so much proof that the Inquisition had been there. Just before I got there, nobody had found this. Next. So this is one of those carvings that you had to see with the sun of 2 o'clock. This isn't that there was shadow. This isn't that my camera was bad. This isn't anything other than this. You couldn't see more. You literally could not see more. This is one of those pictures. And if you look, you can kind of see there's letters or carvings. You couldn't see much more. So it's one of the ones that I had sent to the archaeologist, who told me, go back at 2 o'clock and the next slide. So here it is at 2 o'clock. So at 2 o'clock, you can see it's a cross. The historians told me that it's on top of 12 little balls that are the 12 tribes of Israel. You see the cross, and it has the Inquisition knife going through it. And on the top, it has the name of God, like a menorah, and it says Yod Hey, Vav Hey, and this is in front of one of the churches. But you can't see it unless you're looking at it at 2 o'clock. Next. And these carvings, another set of carvings, this cross, let's say, with the anchor on the bottom, is also standing at the door of the church at mezuzah height. So they had nothing. All their mezuzahs they had to take out. So I compared this, and the historians concurred, and this anchor with a circle is seen on very ancient coins from Israel out of Jerusalem. So all of these symbols here are symbols that have been used by the Jews, but especially the anchor with the circle. Next. Okay, so this is the entrance of the church where the crypto Jews, they were still marginalized. They couldn't go in the front door. So here on the right door jamb of the back of the church, you see again the cross with the anchor and the circle. And this is another one of those instances where everything was really rough, and you could see that the Jews were coming in and touching it, and it's soft as butter. It's almost like soft marble. When you get there, they were touching this instead of a mezuzah. Next. So to my amazement, the whole town has tunnels underground. And I have been in these tunnels. Sometimes you can stay, they're carved out of granite, but the whole town is connected from one end to the other. And you can go on your stomach sometimes, like the one on the left. I've been through a lot of these tunnels. I was going to be there next week. Obviously, I'm not there, but I was going to be there with someone that was actually just going to let me go down there and see them from, you saw that whole town from the beginning to the end. And I'm hoping to find other carvings and things, because there's a lot written about that the Jews had hiding places before they were able to make their way to Portugal. And this goes beyond that synagogue. This is too big. This is a couple of miles of underground tunnels. So that would lead me to believe, and I don't like to make hypotheses about this. I have to go back with a historian. But you can see, and the next slide. This is more of those tunnels. So they're either carved out very nicely. A lot of the residents have lit them, but they just go from one end of the village to the other. Next. So you can see I've kind of mapped the Jewish quarter down at the bottom in blue. I've mapped where my family lived, where the mikveh was, where the house with the arch was. So basically everything was taking place down here where all this blue is. And of course, I'm only mapping my own family, so I don't know about the other Jewish families. Next. So this is also a very important find. So when I was looking for a coat of arms, and I found this coat of arms to the left that says Fermoseia, the name of the town, to the left. And I'm in my house one day and I'm looking for clues, and I turn it around and the letters are in Hebrew, of course. So what does it say in Hebrew? It says Lisgor, which means closed. I think that the history of this village was meant to be closed. And it's on their coat of arms. I mean, from their ancient coat of arms. So that was really like unbelievable that this turned from English letters to the Hebrew letters on the other side. Next. And this is my own tree before 1600, So the last grandmother down here in the purple, if I go down from there, that's where my lineage is. And anyone that you see in the olive green, these were people, families burned and judged, and some for things as simple as wearing a white shirt on Shabbat, others for not eating on certain days. Now, there were certain days, obviously Yom Kippur, where they were being watched like hawks. So they couldn't keep the fast of Yom Kippur. So they started keeping the fast of Esther during Purim. And so to be able to deflect the Inquisition, they made up Saint Esther. So there was never a Saint Esther in the Catholic Church, but people still today don't know that there's no Saint Esther. Saint Esther was made up by the Jews. So some of them were keeping the fast of Esther. So as all of this family was killed in the Inquisition, it's just amazing. So this is my mom's tree. After I finished with my mom's tree, my dad had always told me, listen, you don't have to dig far to find the Jews in my tree. So from mom's side, they were burned in the Inquisition of Sevilla. They were taken over to Portugal. So in Lisbon and Coimbra and Évora, Portugal. And on my dad's side, I went back to 1100 in the Canary Islands, and my dad's family was judged and killed in the Inquisition of the Canary Islands. They fled to Cartagena, Colombia. First, they were judged in Cadiz, Spain, then in Cartagena, Colombia, and in the Canary Islands. So of the 32 lines going to my ancestry from my lineage, 28 of them go back to Jews that were killed in different Inquisitions. Next. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. God bless. Hashem should continue to give you koyach. Let's stop the share. Okay. All right.
So I will answer the questions that before anybody asks me about my kids, so my kids are now grown. My son is 45. He lives in Maryland, and he has a daughter. And my granddaughter, he married a Catholic girl from Costa Rica. And however, he is very connected to his ancestry. And when his daughter was 1, he put her at the JCC school, and she was there until she was 5. And she got this whole background. When she comes over, she's right next to us when we're making Kiddush or when I'm lighting my candles. But she is now in a Catholic school, and really, you know, he instills in her all of the Jewish tradition strongly, but they are practicing Catholics. My daughter just got married this last September. She's 35 years old. She married a non-Jewish man. She is going to have a baby very soon, and we're very excited about that. But my daughter does not practice anything, 0. She was brought up in a home with my husband and I, which was an Orthodox home. So her dad was taking her on Sundays to church, and I backed off because I didn't want to mess with her head. It was too much. So she got whatever she needed from her Jewish lineage at home, but she is not a practicing anything. So that takes care of the kids, and I'm ready for whatever questions.
There was a question earlier that Yochebed had asked when you were visiting the hometown. She wanted to know if there was a cemetery there, if there was any Jewish.
I did. I'm a big cemetery person. I go back and forth. The cemetery had nothing before 1918 or 1917. What I did find odd is that all of a sudden I'm face to face with this massive grave that my grandfather had in 1955, brought everybody, all the remains, over to this massive grave that he put there with at least 4 generations. But it had a cross on it. So this was a Catholic family. Notably, nowhere up and down this whole area, which was very Jewish, up the river and down the river on one side or the other, there is no Jewish cemetery.
Then there was a question from Ian. He was asking about the Inquisition, that whether it was true that it was worse in Portugal than it was in Spain.
Worse?
Yeah, that was the question.
Okay, this is so I should be able to write on here.
No, actually, in Spain, I would say it was worse in Spain. It was not worse in Portugal, because in Portugal, people were hiding and practicing. And even though they were being caught, there was a certain leniency that the king was kind of turning his eye to, okay, we're just going to let it happen. The Jews were forced to convert, but they were not kicked out of Portugal because the king realized that the Jews were valuable. So the king said, everybody must convert, and you can go, but you have to leave your kids behind. And what Jew leaves his kids behind?
I didn't do it right.
So I wouldn't say it was worse. I would say it was different.
Gail, you had a question?
No, I was just trying to post a comment.
Okay. All right.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello, Ginny. I'm Juan.
Hi, Juan.
We have spoken several times. Thank you. And my question is, first of all, Kol HaKavod, I never tire of your story. Is one of the most inspiring stories I have ever heard on the subject.
Thank you.
Well, as you know, my problem is that I'm a bit in a sim. I have been in the Orthodox conversion track for 3 years now.
Correct.
I converted Reform many years ago. But the point is, when the situation for a person that wants to go back to his roots goes from difficult to almost impossible, not only because I live in Spain with very few choices,
Correct.
but also because of the current situation. Sometimes I
got
doubt
my name on
if
there,
I
but I put it in
should.
the wrong place.
I think he was, Hani, he's muted. Okay.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, go
Okay, you're
ahead,
good
Hani.
now.
A-
Good
and
now.
and try to get and try to get back to me, to my lineage, and begin such a hard and difficult and long process of discovering all your ancestors in the hope of one day be able to be recognized as a born Jew. I know up till now I was perfectly content with converting, but not only it would do more justice to my past, but also I feel like conversion is just out of my grasp. What would you say?
You know, Juan, I had the same problem about 4 years into, we say, and I know how long you've been at this. We say, oh, 4 years. You know what? A lot happens in 4 years. That's a long time, especially when you're young, like you. You want to get on with your life. I was young. I wasn't married. And someone advised me back then that I should convert because it was easier to work the Jewish system from the inside than it was to work it from the outside. And I think, and I understand, believe me, I understand how you don't feel it's correct to have to convert when you have this lineage. And I know your lineage, I've seen it, and I know it, and I know how you feel that you're Jewish. Why should you have to convert? Is it an injustice? Yes, 100%. However, this is a system. And if you don't work it correctly, like any other system, you're going to continue this struggle. And I know you're even having trouble getting a conversion during COVID because it's in London, it's in Israel, and I get it. My advice to you is to continue the path to convert and claim your personal lineage later, like I did. Because once you convert and once you're a Jew, believe me, I mean, a recognized Jew, I apologize for that, a recognized Jew, those doors will open. But if you're not Jewish, they don't open. So that is my heartfelt advice to you. Even though I don't agree with it, that's my advice to you.
Oh, thank you very much. I just hope the opportunity finally arises for me. Thank you.
It will. By the way, I am actually praying for this for you every Friday night. Okay, honey?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless you, and you should have success and find the answer to all your prayers in a revealed way very quickly. We have here a question in from Hannah. In Afro-Caribbean islands such as Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Curacao, where there was intermarriage between a Nusim and Afro-Caribbean people, how can those people identify their Jewish heritages? And the same, continuing on that question, how do our Nusim then relate to colonial identities, the injustices that happened to Taginos and Afro-Caribbean enslaved peoples? Are there reconciliations that are happening?
Wow, that's a mouthful. So I know, so what you're saying is different for every single island that you mentioned. Jamaica is a very Jewish island. It's important to understand the history. If you're looking for your roots, you need to understand the history of how the people that you came from got to where you are. So if you're in Curacao, it's a totally different ballgame. They went from Portugal to the Netherlands, and from the Netherlands down to Recife, and then to Curacao. Period, the end. They were practicing from the get-go. If they were in Jamaica, they went from Portugal to Amsterdam to London and down to Jamaica, huge Jewish communities. And if they were in the Dominican Republic, there are so many roots. I'm from Cuba, but Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, there's a lot of people that that have claimed their Jewish roots from these three island nations, as well as others. So the intermarriages, I have not personally, with all of the people that come to me, and there's a lot from all of these nations, I have not seen the families generally have a custom to marry each other. In my family, and most of us, we only marry our cousins. So for 500 years, my family only married each other. So we did not blend with the Afro-Indian colonial. So I can't really answer the second part of your question properly, because I have not been privy to anyone coming to me with that particular dilemma.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking particularly about the Dominican Republic, which is kind of a different thing, different ballgame. There were inquisitions the entire time.
The Dominican Republic, I have people that understand the Dominican Republic intimately. There's a rabbi who is now living in the Netherlands. Write me separately. I'll put you in touch with him. And you're already in touch with him? Okay. So the Dominican Republic, a lot of people are claiming their roots. It's a different ballgame. Each island is a different ballgame.
There was a question from Laurie. You said your children's papers wouldn't allow them to be Jewish. Please explain, what did your mother know about her heritage?
I'd rather not get into why I could not convert my children. That was kind of a legal issue. And I don't know what my mother knew, because not my grandmother and not my mom ever spoke to me openly as I've told the story. My grandmother taught me kitchen customs that were Jewish, and I go into detail about those in this book, about the recipes, and even in my first book, My 15 Grandmothers, I go into that. But no one ever spoke about it openly. Never. It was never spoken.
Has Jeannie heard of something called the Cartagena Family Circle? If yes, can you tell us about?
No, I have not. I have not. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And someone is asking about my DNA.
Oh,
So yes, my DNA, I have done my DNA. The first time I did it with Family Tree DNA. I found an exact match in Recife, Brazil, which makes sense because my family went back and forth, and we have been comparing our family trees. There are a lot of overlaps, especially at the 14th grandmother. I was very surprised when I met him online on Facebook messaging and so on. We've been in touch for many, many years. I was very surprised that he took back the Jewish religion himself, coming from a Catholic family, and we share DNA. I also found and became very close with a cousin in Brussels from my 14th grandmother as well, a different branch. And as far as the DNA, I did it on Mom, and she had 48% Sephardic, and I had 25% Sephardic. When I uploaded my results to MyHeritage, for some reason, and I talk about DNA, but you know, it's such a mixed bag. All of a sudden, my results turned to Ashkenaz, and I know that my dad's roots, a lot of them were Ashkenaz, so I don't know why it was picking that up more. But definitely, I try to follow up on all the DNA leads, but these days, I more help other people. I think I'm finished looking into my past.
Okay, I think that just about wraps it all up. Jeannie, I want to thank you so much. One quick question, which I think is very relevant. Can you recommend the DNA testing company?
So it all depends where your lineage is from. I recommend two, Family Tree DNA and MyHeritage. If you do it in Family Tree DNA, you can always upload your results to MyHeritage. I don't recommend, if you're just an Ashkenazi, if you were an Ashkenazi Jew, definitely MyHeritage. And if you have these mixed backgrounds like mine, I would definitely go the Family Tree DNA. and then I would upload to MyHeritage. Companies like Ancestry and 23andMe, they're not equipped wrong word. These DNA tests are done by comparison. So it's all about who is testing with the particular corporation. So if the people that are testing with 23andMe are generally more looking for the health aspect, and I know that I have many people that have done 23andMe and find 0 Jewish ancestry. And the minute they start going to a company that has a lot more Jewish testing, like Family Tree DNA, all of a sudden there is a lot more testing, or MyHeritage. So one of those two.
Thank you. Thank you. Jeannie, someone is asking if you wouldn't mind sharing your email information.
Not a problem, but it's just easier if you go to jeanniemilgrom.com and contact me from there, and I answer all of my emails. So not a problem. Go to jeanniemilgrom.com.
I can attest to that. Even if it's taken us this amount of time to connect, but you
Honey,
always,
I answer within a day, not 4 years.
Oh, no, not you're answering. You always answered. But I'm saying that as long as I've been wanting you to come and make this presentation, and it was worth every minute of the wait. I want
Thank
to
you.
really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for everything that you do for the Jewish nation, for the world. And I want to bless you. God should bless you with nachas and with good health. And the whole world should be blessed with good health and with light and with love
Amen.
and with peace and with healing. And it should be just all good news that we have to share with each other, Be'ezrat Hashem.
Amen.
Just want to remind everybody, as I announced at the beginning, but for the benefit of those who came on later, Thursday morning at 10 a.m., Rabbi Bookit begins a 5-part series called Positivity Bias. And if you would like to sign up for this and get a book called Positivity Bias, written by Rabbi Kalmanson, which is based on the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, an amazing course beginning this Thursday at 10 a.m. And you can find that at torahdirect.com. God bless. Thank you very much, Jeannie.
Thank you.
Take care. We will be in touch. Be'ezrat Hashem. Laila Tov.
Thank you,
Yes,
everybody.
all unmute yourselves, and a great big
Thank you.
round of applause.
Whoa.
Thank you so much. Thank
Wow, wonderful.
you. Great to see you. Thank you.
Presentation. Thank you.
My pleasure.
very
Thank
much.
you. Thanks.
That was
Bye-bye.
wonderful.
Thank you. Bye-bye.